Hi everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the book Refuge and welcome to Historical Romance 101. So this video is something I've been wanting to make for a while, especially since, we just have had the historical romance readathon. Historical romances have kind of really blown up again. I feel like they're getting a second renaissance or a revival, whatever you'd call it. Although some of us who've been loving them for many, many years never really lost our love of historical romances. And man, they are just so much fun. And so what I am gonna try to do with this video is, number one, the disclaimer is I am not all-knowing. The research I did for this was minimal. I'm mostly gonna share what my knowledge is. And I also had put on my community page asking some of you if there are specific questions you've had, because every now and then I get one that pops up and it's not a big deal for me to just answer it, but I'd really like to have a video that I can point people to, as well as one that has my recommendations, as well as I'm planning to have an extensive list down below of other people's videos, or a playlist I'm thinking of putting together of different historical recs that are based on different time periods, tropes, my other favorite creators' videos, just to kind of put everything in one place so that when things like readathons come up or people have questions or someone new gets into historical romance, I feel like that has been happening. Every day I see a new thing on Twitter where someone's like, I tried a historical romance and I think it's my favorite, including my friend Tamika, who just very recently started it and she is having a wonderful time with it. Viewers who find me, because I have a video that went up over a year ago. It was a while ago, which was my first ever video that I made about historical romance, and I think it's the second most viewed video on my channel, and the first one was a reaction to After, so I don't even count that video because that was a clickbait thing. So anyway, it is my second most watched video, and well, that is just me talking about, at this point, books that pretty much everyone has heard about. Some of you are still really new to the genre, and maybe you're finding this video because I myself sent it to you when you asked a question. So hopefully this will be the place for you. I'm gonna try to, I'm not promising this will be quick. This might be a pretty long video, but I wanna kind of go over the different time periods, what makes a book historical romance. A lot of people are asking for beginner recommendations. I have some opinions about that, I'll let you know. As well as I'm gonna go over the main tropes you see in historical romance, and then a couple of terms, the English peerage, which some people have questions about, and we'll go through that, as well as some specific recommendations for some people who ask for them. And then what I want this video to be is I want this to be the place where the questions get answered. I have lots of people who are viewers on my channel, including some of those other creators you'll see. So if there's a question that I don't cover, or there's a recommendation that you'd really like, feel free to leave that down below in my comments, and this will be the video where we answer everything. So that if it's not in this video, hopefully your answer is in the comments below of one of the two, okay? All right, that's enough of an intro. So let's kind of go in. This may be all over the place, but I'm trying to go through this in a, chronological order. So I'm going to start with defining historical romance, the time periods, and then we'll kind of go from there, okay? So what is a historical romance? So two parts to that. First, the historical part, which is generally decided that anything before World War II is considered historical, and then the romance part being the main plot of the story is two people falling in love. That is why for me, I consider Outlander a historical romance, even though the author says otherwise, even though I'll have plenty of people who jump on my back and say that it's not. I disagree. I think the series as a whole is historical fiction with a twinge of fantasy, but that first book is about two people falling in love, and the conclusion of that story of that first book is the wow, we're in love, we're gonna be together, okay? That is the rise and fall of that story, is Claire falling in love with Jamie and deciding to stay with him over her husband in the 21st century. Now, the series as a whole, I would consider more as historical with romance sprinkled out, because as things broaden out, we're following historical events, and the plot of that series is getting through those historical events and keeping our family alive and staying together. So while romance is important throughout the story, it's no longer the main point of the rest of the series. However, I will stand by and fight to the death that the first book is a historical romance, okay? All right? It is. I'm just... fight me. Okay. So, but anyway, I went on a sidetrack. So to me, that's a place where the two things meet, which is why I bring up Outlander, besides it being one of my favorite books anyway, is that historical romance is historical time period, and the main plot of the story is two people falling in love. So what is historical? So one of the questions that came up, which I have seen this before, someone was confused that there is different types of historical romance. So what I would say to that is, I wouldn't say that one is historical and one isn't, but within historical, there are different sub time periods, just like there is when you're reading contemporary romance, except with historical, this is where it gets a little fuzzy, because you can categorize the story based on what its trope is, and you can also categorize it based on what the time period is taking place in and what the main subject of it is. So most of the historical romances that you are seeing talked about on Booktube, that you're seeing on Goodreads, are a England, Europe set romance. There's also American, which don't all have to be Western, but there's American. And then you have like nautical, which is mostly pirate romance. And those are kind of going to encompass pretty much everything you're going to see that we talk about. Of course, there's side things. I myself, I'm not going to be the best suggestion for non-American or European set historical romances. I'm not even fully versed in the American ones. I only have a few. That's something to keep in mind, that I'm hoping down below some of you who have read, you know, non-American set ones can help with that, because that's not gonna be me, because I've only read one or two, I think. All right, so let's go through the time period. So first we're gonna start with England and Europe. And of course, there can always be ancient times. So there is like caveman, but those aren't usually, like, those aren't always categorized as historical. They're usually either as like romantic fantasy, because a lot of the like older ones I feel like always end up falling into like fantasy or something. Like I'm thinking of Clan of the Cave Bear. Okay, this is a, you know, it's literally caveman historical romance. These are by Jean A. Mall, or M. All, her name's hard to pronounce for me, where hers are set like there isn't time being kept yet, right? And you can only guess at like if that's historically accurate or not based on certain things. But where I'm starting it with, I decided to start with the medieval time period, which is a pretty big gap. Okay, so medieval is gonna be the year AD 450 to 1485. Okay, so that is the medieval time period. I have Shannon Drake's books. So there's going to be a few of these I haven't read yet. I've been collecting lots of historical romances, so I can tell you what the time periods of them are and what they mean, but I'm not necessarily recommending them because I've read them, but I want to show them to you. So I have Shannon Drake has some medieval. Here's a picture inside, which means, so this one takes place in 1357. So that fits within that. Also, Lindsay Sands has a series that's set then. You can tell because of what she's wearing on it. This one takes place in 1189. So that's medieval. The Black Lion by Jude Deveraux. I just read this book. This one takes place in, this one doesn't say the time, but I know that it's medieval because of what I read about it, because it has the keep inside. So some things that categorize things that medieval, like besides the time period, which is mostly what we're talking about, you'll know that this will have the, there's a master of his keep, there's fiefdoms. A lot of the times we're dealing with the king told me to do this or that, because England was set up as basically just like a big fiefdom. So even though there's people who are the lords of their castle, they still had to answer to the king if they didn't want to go to war with him. That being the case, we see that happen in the bride, because the king is telling Alec Kincaid that he needs to have a bride, and so he sends him to get an English bride. He's Scottish, and so his king, as kind of a punishment to that English family as well, they're having to give one of their daughters to be married to a Scottish lord. So this one takes place in Scotland in 1100, so that's medieval, as well as this one doesn't show the date either, but I know this one's medieval. This is A Kingdom of Dreams by Judith McNaught. This one doesn't say the date right inside, but this one is as well. Same kind of story. This is sort of an arranged marriage story that's medieval. So that's the time period of medieval. If you see someone mention it's a medieval historical romance, you know that that is going to be before 1485. And I believe the impetus of changing of that was when a new king took over. I think that's when the Tudor period starts. Again, any of these like historicals besides the actual date of this, I'm sorry, I didn't do a full research paper on this, so keep that in mind. But I believe it's when a certain like king took over. It ended the medieval period and started the Renaissance period. So the Renaissance period is going to be 1485 until 1811. Okay, that covers another big chunk of time. That's another 400-year span. And this you're going to find, this is where it really starts to expand, and there's a lot of different stories to choose from. I find that I don't find a ton of European ones that take place in like the 16 and 1700s. Like, I don't know why. I feel like the ones I see, it's either a medieval book or it's a Regency book. I don't see a lot of that in between time. I don't know why. That's not where I stand with everything, but let's do some recommendations for that. So within this time, you're gonna have some of the Tudor books. So an author who has a lot of those is gonna be Philippa Gregory. She has the Tudor series that she did. She has like Red Queen. She has the Anne Boleyn, not Anne Boleyn, the other Boleyn girl. So there's gonna be lots of those. These I'm showing for historical romance, but I would say they lean a little more towards historical. There's not quite as much sexy scenes or love happening, and they have a lot to do with duty and, you know, listening to the king, because they're literally about like the kings and queens and stuff like that. So something to keep in mind for that. Another author for this, you have Georgette Hare. So The Grand Sophie is a book that I read earlier this year, and I really enjoyed that. You're gonna have Austen fits in within this period. Again, those ones aren't even necessarily considered historical because they were written at the time she was living, so they're technically contemporary romances, but I like to bring them up because if you want to like tip your toe into historical, I feel like it could feel like you're reading a historical, but really they're contemporary for their time, so that's something to keep in mind. Also to fit into here, Eloisa James. Her books are at the very bottom of my stack, so I don't want to pull those up, but she has, most of her books fit into that time period. Also Elizabeth Hoyt, who I own a lot of but haven't read any of hers yet, but her Maiden Lane all takes place during that time. As well as Poldark. Now again, this is me cheating a little bit, plugging one of my favorite book series because I've read all 12 of these books and I adore them. But these books take place the end of the 1700s into the beginning of the 1800s. So that's a really good series to read if you're wanting to tip your toe into, if you like that. Oh, I freaking love those books so much. So I'm cheating a little, but I'm putting those into there. So yeah, a lot of books are gonna fit into that time period, all right? So then we end the Renaissance period with the Regency period. So this is the period that you're gonna hear of a lot of books taking place in this. Most of the historical romances that are European based, they're gonna take place between the Regency and Victorian era. So little known fact, you'll hear Regency era historicals like brought up a lot. Like people say it's a Regency romance, this and this. The Regency period is the shortest period of all of these that we're talking about because it's only when King George III was considered mad, and one of his sons, who is referred to as Prinny in a lot of the books, he was the regent at the time. So while his father was mad, but before his father died, he was the regent. okay? So this was only a period of 11 years, or 9 years. It was from 1811 to 1820 was considered the Regency period, okay? And it was a very specific time. Like, it was when a lot of things started to like loosen a little bit, because printing was into quite some interesting things, and so things were really kind of like loosened up during that time. This time period, you are going to find a lot of my favorite authors fit into, but not all of their books, because they wrote books through Victorian and Regency and Victorian. But Mary Below fits into this, Jo Beverley, Loretta Chase, Lisa Kleypas, Stephanie Lawrence, and Julia Quinn all will have books that take place during this time. In fact, I think you'll find most of the popular historical romance authors that will get mentioned on Booktube, their books are mostly going to focus between these time periods, because it's really kind of the fun one. It's the height of, you know, that like social go to town for the season, which we'll get into what the season is in a little bit here. There's kind of a break where it's not called a specific one this time, between when that oldest son takes over and then Queen Victoria comes in. So it's still called the modern period, right? As soon as the Regency has started, that's our modern period. But the Regency only lasted from 1811 to 1820, and then we have a gap of about 12 years where it like doesn't have another name. And Queen Victoria takes over when she's 18 years old in 1832, okay? So then the Victorian era will last from 1832 until 1901, when Queen Victoria dies. During this time, there's a bit of a, in history of itself, there's a bit of a, what's it going to be called? Like conservative mindset comes back again, because Queen Victoria is very conservative. It's also when the white wedding dress started, because Victoria wore a very pale, creamy white dress, and that's when that started to become more popular, because white dresses like weren't a thing before then. Few things to know. So then the Victorian period is where a lot of my favorite books take place. So we have Jennifer Ashley, Lorraine Heath, Cressley Cole, Loretta Chase again, Julia Quinn again, all those that I mentioned, they're going to fit into that time period. So that is a fun one to mention, because yeah, most of my favorite books take place during the Victorian period, okay? So moving along to, we'll talk about American real quick, because I don't have too many recs for those, because American history, like, I don't feel a super desire to read those, just because I'm more interested in where I'm not from, and we didn't really keep our, like, dukes and lords and such for very long, right? So the American period starts obviously with colonial. So colonial is considered 1630 to 1798, okay? So that you're gonna have, right, you're gonna have early colonial stuff. So you're gonna have when we were still underneath British rule. So there are still some people who may be outcast from England, or people who don't want to be there anymore coming over to here. You know, then there's revolutionary time periods fit into colonial. So any of those fit into that time period. I believe there's a lot of Beverly Jenkins that fit into that time. But again, I'm not the best one for doing that. Then there's the Civil War time period, which is the 1860s. Okay, so that fits in there. And then after that, we get the Western time period. Okay, so this is the one that I feel like is the most common, going to be the historical romance, the Westerns. Okay, so the cowboy romances. I have In Want of a Wife by Joe Goodman. This is my favorite cowboy romance. There's also a lot of Joanna Lindsay's take place in America. Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of that. Also, Westerns, just so you know, they can be in Canada, America, or Australia, okay? And they're going to last until, it's gonna be post-Civil War, and when the railroad really expanded everything out, and there was a move for everyone to move from this and push out, and they really started, you know, putting in their homes, and homesteading and all of that stuff went into place. That's Little House on the Prairie time, stuff like that. And that lasted until 1917, when we entered World War I. Is technically any time a Western can be in there. But then remember, there are contemporary Westerns as well. I'm just talking about the historical romance Westerns, okay? There's definitely contemporary ones as well. Okay, then just a couple other side notes to mention that fit in with historical romance but don't have a super specific time period. There's nautical romances, which that's basically going to be pirate. I mean, there aren't too many other like historical romance. Like if it's nautical, it's going to be pirate, right? So Sea of Ruin is a self-published historical romance. This is extremely sexy. I don't consider this an intro book. I'll talk more about where it fits later on down below, but I just thought I would show it because I freaking love it. There also is Jennifer Ashley's has a pirate series, which I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to. But something I didn't know, so the pirates were mostly active from 1660 until the 1800s, which is kind of funny because a lot of the pirate romances I feel like take place in the 1800s, and that's actually when they were starting to decline because rules got a lot more stricter on the seas and it just wasn't as profitable for them to do what they did. So the heyday of them is going to be from the 1660s to the 1880s, where there was lots of wars happening in that area, so it was easy for a pirate to go from place to place and to not have to have allegiance to any one specific place. Okay, that was a lot, right? Okay, so that was going over the time periods of historical romance to the best of my ability. Remember, please don't type me a bunch of stuff about how I'm wrong or right. Like, I literally just pulled this up based on the time periods that are shown on a Wikipedia page breaking down historical romance time periods. That's just a little bit of fact. I hope that helps clear up when people say Regency romance or medieval romance. It's all historical romance. It's just that delineates what time it's taking place. So that's the difference, okay? Now let's get into a couple other terms that some people have asked me about, okay? So the first thing I want to touch on is the English peerage, okay? This is another thing. I've pulled this up on Wikipedia. Don't at me if you happen to be a specialist in this stuff, okay? I'm not going to listen, whatever. I'm listing to you what you're going to see in the books. So the British peerage is the hierarchy basically leading to the throne, right? And the titles that people have that give them certain parts of land or give them certain levels of power, gives them a seat in the House of Lords. And there can be, these titles can be in like Ireland, Scotland, in the UK area. Britain and Ireland is what usually gets brought up. What you will hear most popularly, right, is the Duke, okay? So the Dukes, they are right below the monarchy. In fact, the first, you know, a lot of the royal family are actually Dukes. That's where a lot of those titles come from. You know, like Sussex, Cambridge, York, Edinburgh, and Kent, and Gloucestershire as well. Sorry, I'm like reading the list. Those are all like people in line for the throne, so something to keep in mind. And there are currently 30 active dukes in Britain. At the most, from what I could find, there was only ever been a total of 74 times the title was given. So a lot of those, and this actually includes, this is cool, I have Wikipedia pulled up, that includes 2 women. 16 of the titles were forfeited or surrendered, 10 were merged with the crown, and 11 are extant, which means they like don't really get used. And so there are 30 current in standing. The people are living. It is an active title getting passed down. So that's why that is the most lucrative. That's the most lucrative title. So when you see a book that's called, I've got to have one in front of me, Falling into Bed with the Duke, okay? This one, let's see, this is the Duke of Ashbury. They don't always have to be real. That's the thing too. Like historical romance authors, they can make it up. But when you read a book with a specific Duke, I'm trying to see if I can find one. But okay, but anyway, sometimes a historical romance author, they'll use a real one. Like they'll be, I've read one with someone with the Duke of Devonshire. You know, like I've read that one before. I've read the Duke of, let me see. There's another one, the Duke of Somerset. I've read you know, like, anyway, there's been different ones where people will maybe use an actual title and they'll do that, or they'll just make up a duke, which is totally fine. It's fake. But just so you know, like, there's only a certain amount of dukes. Like, so that's why it's so lucrative, is that it's not an unending amount, and then it's a title that's passed down. So then what can happen, though, is when, you know, a duke has their heir isn't called the duke, a duke again. Like, a duke can't be a duke and have a dad. That's something that Sarah McLean always says. So their children will then have, like, they'll be like an earl or a marquis or a viscount, right? So, but the order of it is it's the duke, and then it's the marquess or marquess, earls, viscounts, barons, and baronets. Okay, that's the order of it. So you can know that based on, you know, maybe you'll see I have the earl takes all. Okay, so that one is the next down from a duke. So that lets you know, like, how high they are. They could be, you'll see in romances, like, a dukedom is baroque. So maybe they haven't been smart with their money, but their title still buys them prestige and a house in the seat of lords. So they'll try to marry an heiress to recoup their losses and get their title back up to where it's supposed to be. So these are a lot of themes that you might see in historical romances. So then the next thing, some people asked me what the ton is. Okay, so this is, you see this a lot. I mean, you see this in most historical romances, especially ones that have to do with needing an arranged marriage to happen, or needing, you know, money for I don't know what I'm talking about. Bleh, cut that out. So the ton is like society as a collective, okay? So something that you'll see is that there's a certain time of the year called the season, where everyone who's looking to get married or to have a good time for the year, they all go into London, and there's a bunch of parties and soirees and all these things that happen for people to mingle and find a significant other, or to be naughty and have some fun. And the public opinion, like the people, are called the ton. So the best way to describe this, okay, so one of my favorite series is the Bridgertons. And there's this character called Lady Whistledown who writes gossip columns. And she'll say things like, the ton has noticed. And the ton is like just speaking of that entity of people. It's the gossip mill. It is what you are held to as, like, if your reputation gets ruined or not. You will be shunned by the ton. So that means, like, the body of people who stick their nose into stuff, right? It's society. That's what the ton means. So it's not, like, I don't know, like, that's how you describe it, right? So if a lady is seen alone with a gentleman and it ends up in the gossip, then all of the, you know, mamas and society ladies find out, and they collectively decide to, like, ooh, we're judging those people because they are sinful, and oh my gosh, are they gonna get married? Because if they don't get married, then it's bad, and you see all that stuff. So the ton is just what the gossips, but yet that's where your reputation is so important. Like, you need to keep a good reputation with a ton, or you could be ruined and have to go hide away and have your bastard baby in secret or something like that, okay? So that's what that means. Like I said, the season, that's a time of the year where everyone goes to London. You'll see, like, the ladies will have their debut, where they will get presented to the king or queen, which means they are of marriageable age now, right? So when they're 16, 17, 18, they'll get presented to the royalty, and they'll be like, okay, we're okaying that this young girl can find someone to marry. And then that means, like, they can go to all the parties now. The dukes and earls and all the gentlemen can see that this woman is now of marriageable age, and they can make an offer for her if they want, or court her if they want. That's what that means. Next, a rake. What does a rake or a rakeess mean? So this just means kind of a playboy, a guy or a girl who gets around, a rake male, rakeess man, or sometimes it's called a rake hellion if it's a woman. I've seen it done a few different ways. And it's basically just someone who, I mean, it's a playboy. It's they'll call him, like, the the rake hell is another thing they call the men. And yeah, it's the same way we call a playboy or someone who gets around. If we're not being too kind, it'd be like a man whore. That's something you can get the reputation as it, right? The Ton would call that person a rake. It means they're not someone who's safe to be alone with, unless they're a duke or an earl or a viscount, and then you want to get them alone so that they have to marry you or something like that. So that's what that word means. Then a dowry. What's a dowry? Okay, that is an amount of money that a woman is worth, that her father or her guardian or whoever has placed on her. That's how much she's worth to whoever marries her, okay? Yes, that's the misogynist, sexist part, but it's also a way that we redistributed wealth, because you didn't have a job. Like, nobody had a job. Your living came from your dukedom, from the land you owned. How much money is it cultivating? Maybe you made investments in different places. So when you think about it that way, you see people always being like greedy about money that way, but they didn't have jobs. They couldn't work their way up to make money all the time. Sometimes people could do that. It's a thing. So by placing money on their daughter and saying like, hey, my daughter is worth 10,000 pounds to you if you marry her, or my daughter doesn't have a lot, it's a good thing she's pretty so that she can get a husband anyway, is saying like what she is worth and like how to redistribute certain funds. Because if a man has only daughters or has only a daughter, he's not going to be able to forge connections or, make new relationships or put into society if he isn't able to put money on his daughter. And then the man who marries her gets to take that on. So sometimes you'll read stories where that's very important, like a man needs money, or you'll see it the other way where a woman, her family doesn't have anything, and so by marrying a rich man, even though she doesn't have the dowry, that man she marries will help bring the standing of her family up. And he, it's not like he would maybe be contracting money for her, but that he would be able to open doors for the family members, help support them, because he's going to take care of his wife's family. So it's funny because it can go both ways, but a woman's the one who has the dowry. So a man, like a woman who doesn't have a dowry but's really pretty, her family may use her then as like, don't you just want a beautiful wife? She'll give you beautiful children, she'll help you have heirs. And then the man who marries her, he might take her without a dowry and help her family. So you can see that happen as well. Okay, then the last other term I just really want to talk about, because just in case you don't know by now, is the term step back and what that means. Okay, so the term step back, if you hear that, if you've seen it on Instagram and you still don't know what that means or whatever, the step back is the picture that is sometimes on the inside of a historical romance that looks like this. Okay, it's that, where you see, ooh, there's a girl in a dress, and you peek inside and there's a sexy little, and usually they're undressed more, they're in a provocative position, something like that. Sometimes you also find these where they don't have a step back, but they have a back picture. I don't have one of those in my pile of everything, but it'll just have one picture and then the sexy will be on the back of it. Okay, that's not like, I still call that a step back, even though it's not in here. It still is like, it's on the back of it. Okay, so that's everything for the terms. I think I went over everything that I had to share with that. So now I'm going to give some recommendations. I have a ton of them in front of me. I've already shown you some, but of course, again, I had some people ask specifically for beginner recommendations, and I have a little bit to say about that. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant before giving you some recommendations. Okay, so the first thing, I want to talk about what people mean by beginner rec and what I mean by beginner's recommendation, okay? Because they're two separate things. One, I know what people mean by a beginner. They think that there are like different levels of historical romance and that some are harder than others, or like what book should I read that's really gonna get me interested in it, that's gonna give me a hunger for more. That can mean so many different things. So what I will always ask whenever I get this question, and maybe you've heard me ask you this, someone says, give me a beginner recommendation. My question is, what books do you like outside of historical romance? What are your favorite tropes? What do you love seeing? Because the only thing that's different about historical romance based on a contemporary romance is the time period. You can still have a BDSM historical. You can still have a friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, brother's best friend, best friend's dad, like any of those tropes, like pretty much besides sports, I haven't seen too many historical sports. I know they exist, but, you know, or like college probably isn't, right? Some of those more like new adult options. But basically any trope that you like in contemporary, I can find it for you in historical. Are you wanting low steam or high steam? Because for a beginner's rec, if you want low steam versus a beginner's rec if you want sexy times, those are completely different. One of those, if you like high steam, this intro book I give you would bore you to tears. Whereas if I gave someone a super sexy book, but they like, you know, Hallmark movies, they're gonna think that that is too dark and too much for them, right? So in my recommendations, I'm gonna give you a variety of them, and you can decide what's the best beginner rec for you. The second part of beginner's rec, I think a lot of you in your mind maybe see, you know, you maybe see Joanna Lindsay when you think of historical, and you've heard a lot of things about those. I've mentioned some of them. Some of them are a little bit racist. Some of them are a little bit too dark. There's non-consent things that happen in them. There are things that if you don't understand the background of the time or know what was going on or understand the positions that people were in, you might think this is a horrible story because you don't know the nuances of that. That is completely understandable, and there are even books for me that had I read them 5 years ago, I would have thought this is a horrible story. And I read it now, and I'm able to see past what's happening in that non-consent situation because there wasn't such a thing as that before, okay? And so some of us, when we read that, I read this context, and specifically, I'm talking about The Black Lion, which I just read. This book was written in the 80s, I think. Can't find it in my stack. My books are everywhere. Yes. This book was written in 1980, and it does have what would completely seem like non-consensual sex scenes because the first time that they're together, her husband doesn't take time to see to her pleasure. However, she wanted to have sex with him up until it's happening. And with a modern day thing, we know a woman can say no at any point in that situation, and it is rape if he continues. Reading a book that's set in medieval times and was written in 1980, there's more that the author is saying about it when she has a non-consent scene. It's not that the author didn't know she was writing a non-consensual scene. It's that it's set in 1100, and once a wife is married to her husband, she submits in everything. But the beauty of the story is that there is a non-consensual sex scene, and it's very obvious that it is not good. And the husband comes to that realization on his own and decides that even though society tells me I can have sex with my wife whenever I want to, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be an asshole, and I'm going to see to my wife's pleasure and be kind to her and help her to love me, and that will make us have a happy marriage. So someone who reads that without knowing that context is going to start this book and think that the guy is a horrible asshole and that he can't be redeemed because there was a non-consensual sex scene, and miss the whole point of the story is that he realizes that it was bad, and because she doesn't even know that she can say no, right? Because she isn't taught that. And it's much more beautiful when he waits for consent later on because he himself, without society or her telling him to wait, he decides to wait and be a better person without anyone else telling him to, okay? That was a side note. I said I was going to go on a bit of a rant about this. So my point being, I would consider this a bit more of an advanced book, even though the themes of it are pretty simple. It's a really basic arranged marriage story. It's medieval times. There's raids. There's things like that. The storyline's pretty basic. But I wouldn't just give that to someone to be their first book because they're going to read it and be like, wow, historical romance sucks. That's not great. Whereas I've been reading historical romance for over a decade, and though this isn't my favorite, because yeah, it still has non-consensual sex in it, and I'm not a big fan of it, and I've seen medieval books do it where they wait till it is consensual, right? I can still appreciate what the author was doing with this, and that she wasn't having a non-consensual sex just because she could. It isn't rape fantasy. They're trying to say more about it, okay? So, for me, what a beginner's rec means is it means you're looking for something that is mostly like contemporary. Like, it's gonna follow the things that you want to see. You want to see consent. You want to see the women get to choose who she's gonna be with. You want to see, you know, sexy times, but you want to see it in the context of dresses and lords and ladies and things like that. And that's totally fine. That's a great place to start. And I have some recs like that for you. If you're okay with those things, if you like darker contemporary, you're okay with maybe some dubious consent, you're okay with the hero being dark and twisty and having a lot of angst, and then that makes him act out in certain ways, I got some of those recommendations for you. I still think they'd be a good beginner rec to the genre for you because you like those kind of contemporaries, so that's what you're looking for in historical. Does that make sense? Okay. Now I'm going to get into some of my recommendations I have, and I'm going to start with those that I think are good for beginners who need it to be modern-like, and then I'll have some for you that you're a beginner to historical, but you like it to be a bit more intense, okay? So let's start with the easier side of things. I, of course, need to talk about some Julia Quinn. However, I've made some changes to which books of hers I recommend to start with. If you like lesser steam, pretty fun, not going to be too hard of context. I can't think right now some of the words I said, but yet is going to be funny, sexy, and sweet. Julia Quinn doesn't go overly raunchy. She has sex scenes out in the open, usually only a couple of them, and they're really sweet, okay? I usually recommend the Bridgertons to start with. However, there has been a lot of issues that have come up with the Duke and and I, again, based on that whole rant that I just went on, I don't have a problem with what happens in that book. I have a problem with it because it's the conflict, but I don't have a problem with it being the conflict because it's a really powerful story if you think about it. So I want to recommend actually her first book, which is Splendid. Splendid is super adorable. It is actually about an American who is in England. She meets Alexander Wrigley, and she meets him kind of like under disguise because she is doing something and he mistakes her as a servant, and he thinks she's really cute, and then he finds out that she's actually their friend's like cousin or something like that, and so there's instantly some chemistry between them, and she's actually an American heiress. So that's a trope that happens a lot too. Like I said, people in America would make a lot of money and then they want clout. They want their kid like married to a duke or something like that, and so they send them back to England with a bunch of money to marry somebody. And so yeah, this is Emma and Alex, and I think it's really cute. It was her first book, and it's adorable. She wrote this when I think she was only 21 when she wrote this, and it's so much fun. This whole trilogy is really cute. I also really like Minx, which is a like guardian romance, but he's not that much older than her, but he inherits her uncle's land, but it can't come to her because she's a girl, and so she tries to scare him away from it, and I think that series is really cute. So I think Julia Quinn is still a great place for people to start, but I maybe like wouldn't have you start with Bridgerton now. I've just kind of changed that about myself. Also, I always like to recommend Tessa Dare. It starts with the Duchess deal. This is pretty steamy. The steam starts pretty quickly. It's about this girl that she had made the wedding dress for this Duke of Ashbury for his fiance, and then he is now a scarred hero. Something happened to him. He's deformed, and so he's not marrying that girl anymore. And Emma, another Emma, that's cute, she still needs to be paid for the dress. So she shows up to his place in the wedding dress. He still needs a wife and he needs an heir, so he asks her to marry him, and he'll make her his duchess, and as soon as she's pregnant, he'll give her an estate and all the money, and she'll raise his kid and he'll be fine. So this is a like marriage at first sight book. It's really cute. I love this whole trilogy. There's a governess game, which is a governess lord romance, and then there's the Wallflower Wager, which is called the best like Slytherin Hufflepuff romance ever, and it's about this girl who she loves animals, and this guy buys the house next door and wants her to get rid of her animals. So there's that. She's a fun place to start. I suggest her other series as well. Spindle Cove is fantastic. I also, of course, always suggest Lisa Kleypas. I think starting with the Wallflower series could be good. I actually started with the Ravenel series, which I really enjoyed. That starts with Cold-Hearted Rake. That is a hate to love. I got recommendations for an enemies to lovers from, her name is Sanjali Manon. I hope I said your name right, honey. I'm not good with names. And that's great. Also, the Dutch of Steel, he's a grumpy hero, so that's a good one. Humorous Rex, I consider Tessa Dares to be pretty funny. Julia Quinn's are really funny. Yeah, I love her books. Here's another series by Julia Quinn, How to Marry a Marquess. This is one of her like earlier duets as well. That one's really fun. I have some other Lisa Kleypas. These ones all have, well, this one trilogy all has pretty tortured heroes. They all have different things going on with them. And these books were also, I feel silly that I picked these, but they're some of my favorites. These were also just kind of a part of the historical romance readathon. So you might have been hearing about them already, but that's the Bow Street trilogy. It actually starts with Someone to Watch Over Me, which this book is currently on Audible Escape. So if you have Audible Escape, you can check this out. And then the second book is Lady Sophia's Lover. And the third book is Worth Any Price. Worth Any Price has an extremely tortured hero. He was actually on a prison ship when he was young, and he is thought to be dead. Like, who he really is thought to be dead, and so he takes another identity because he doesn't want to take over the pressure of being the heir after what he's lived through. And he actually becomes kind of like a, not a gun for hire, but like a private detective. And he gets sent to go bring this girl back to her fiance, but her fiance is a horrible, scary person, and so he decides to marry her instead, which is really cute. Also, a fun one I just read by Lisa Kleypas is called Suddenly You. This is a standalone. This is a woman, it's her 30th birthday, and for her birthday, she decides to buy herself an escort, which I think is so cool. But so she went to meet this madam and asked for a gigolo to be sent to her house. So the madam, though, who, this is a madam we see through other books in Lisa Kleypas, like we see in different times, and this madam knows that sending an escort won't be the best person. So she has a business partner named, what's his name? Jack Devlin. And so she sends him to this lady's house, not telling him what he's showing up to. And then Amanda, who, she's an author, she's fantastic. She chickens out, but Jack ends up giving her a kiss and not going too far with her because he's not an escort. And then she runs into him a couple days later, and he's actually a publisher who wants to republish her book as a serial, kind of like Mark Twain has done with books, or, you know, like Sherlock Holmes and stuff like that. And she now is going to work with him, and they end up becoming kind of like friends with benefits. And I just thought it was so fresh and new to be in a, I think this is Regent's, nope, this is Victorian, very beginning of Victorian. So it was really, really fun for that. Now let's get into some darker books, but books I think could still be good starters, okay? Like, if you want the darker thing, but you still want women who are pretty empowered and strong, I 100% recommend the Highland Pleasure series, which was retitled as the Mackenzie McBride series by Jennifer Ashley. You've also heard about this book a lot because all my book friends have read it and they love it. You also will have heard a lot about, where's that one? Carrigan Byrne, which is also a darker series. This is the Victorian Rebel series. It has a lot of tortured heroes, and it's very deep and dark and twisty and awesome. So, yeah, this one, the first one has an autistic hero and a widow named Beth, and it's so good. The series is amazing. Some other recommendations. Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase. This has an amazing heroine. Her name is Jessica Trent. She is an older woman as well, and she comes head to head with Sebastian Ballister, who is the Marquess of Dane, and they really go head to head. And Jessica is just so clever, and the way that she's able to, like, she's not even trying to, like, well, she is. She manipulates Dane in certain ways, but she also is the most honest and straightforward and fantastic woman ever. And this book, I feel like, would be a fun intro to the story, because Jessica, there are situations where Dane is maybe trying to take advantage, and she's just like, nope, I'm one step ahead of you. This is how it's going to be. And I just really, really appreciate that about her. yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop now because what I'm gonna do is those are some recommendations from me. Like I said, I'm either gonna have a playlist linked or I'm going to have a bunch of videos linked down below that are gonna have even more recommendations. So if you're interested in what I've said, you like this background information I shared, please go ahead and check out those down below if you want more detailed recommendations, because I could go on forever. I myself have a playlist that's all historical recommendations, as well as there's dark historicals, there's all the different tropes we talked about, all of those are gonna be there. So I'm gonna kind of wrap this up because I know it's getting really long about what I talked about already. But I hope this answers some of your questions. Like I said, if you have further questions that I didn't answer, put them in this video, put them down below. I'm gonna try to, either I will answer them or one of my viewers will answer them because we talk about this stuff all the time. So please go ahead and check those out. Make sure you subscribe to me. I also have listed down below our Romance Booktube Discord, which has all of our booktubers and friends there who can answer questions, give recommendations, and help you along the way, okay? All right, thank you so much for watching this. I put it in videos 3 to 4 times a week, and you can see some more of them right now. Bye.